All right, HCC, how you doing? We are in this Labor Day weekend. I hope it's a great weekend. I hope for those of you who get the day off tomorrow, it's a day to kind of recoup, re-energize. And thank you just for making this a part of your weekend. On a busy weekend, other things you could be doing. We're really glad you're here at these services here at HTC. I want to welcome you guys here at Powell Auditorium here at Victorville. For those joining us in Hesperia today, big welcome to you. We're glad you're here. And those in Apple Valley today, thanks for joining us, making this a part of your weekend. And for those online, we're really glad that you're watching as well. So we have been in this series called Handle with Care for the last 5 weeks. In it, our goal and desire has simply been to see the basics of God's design for our sexuality. And it's a topic that often in church, we just tend to not go there or tend to glancingly talk, but we feel like it was really important, not in a reaction to anything, but just important for us as the people of God to have a good understanding of his design. And we've kind of gone back to the book of Genesis and looked in different aspects, seen what Paul's written and others to the church. And our goal has simply been that, to become very familiar with the real thing, with God's design, so that we can evaluate counterfeits as a result. So today we're going to lean into this last day and talk about that relationship, especially where we've said that God has designed sex to be enjoyed is within the covenant of a husband and a wife for their lifetimes. As we're going to talk about marriage today, and that was actually a really rich part of those of you who took our survey. We just asked folks in this series, hey, give us a little bit of understanding how this has been for you, as well as questions that we haven't addressed. And when we did tangible takeaways last week, we addressed a whole sequence of questions, but we saved all of the ones related to the dynamics of our marriages until this week, because that's what our topic's gonna be today with Robbie and Brenda. And so I just appreciate, and there were just a host of questions about the realities of what does this look like in my marriage? What does this look like as a result of divorce or whatnot? And we'll address those beyond, but as we dive in to this topic of the role of sexuality within our marriages, I just want to remind you that this has been all of God's design from the beginning. All the way back to Genesis 2, literally the second chapter in this big book that you have. It begins with God bringing a man and woman together in the covenant of marriage. And then Moses writes commentary and says that the two shall become one. There's this new one flesh relationship, one flesh covenant that results out of this idea of marriage. And then God calls him to himself a people of his own, the people of Israel, throughout the former covenant, the Old Testament. And in that, what you continue to see from the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, the entire scope of the minor prophet Hosea is all using this theme of that covenant relationship that God had made with his people, likening it to that of marriage. And God continuing to say, you have committed adultery against me. We had connected in covenant, you had said you would do this, but you've continued to follow after other gods, and yet I have remained faithful and true to you. And so this idea of marriage is a powerful symbol, and when that covenant goes wrong, when one or more of the parties walk away from their decision, their commitment, their covenant to one another, God's saying, I've been faithful and true, you have not. And then we move into the New Testament and we see really the culmination of not just God with one particular group of people, but God with peoples from every tribe, tongue, and nation in his church. And he likens this idea of marriage to that relationship that Jesus has with his bride, the church. And I wanted to read that for you today from Ephesians chapter 5, verse 22. It begins, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Verse 25, husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. In this same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body just as Christ does the church. For we are members of his body. For this reason," and he quotes Genesis 2, "for this reason a man will leave his father and mother, be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh." This is a profound mystery, and listen to what he says. "But I am talking about Christ and the church. However, each one of you must also love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband." And so what we see is that our marriages that we are living out, absolutely imperfect, but the goal and the design is that we would demonstrate the relationship at a microcosm way of the larger relationship between Jesus and his people, Jesus and his bride, the church. And so what we're going to talk about today is, though that is the design, what happens when we live outside of that design, and what can be healed, what can be really the hope that we have moving forward. And you're going to be so just encouraged and impressed by Robbie and Brenda's story. So would you welcome them out today? All right. All right, good to see you guys. Come on out. Well, if you know Robbie and Brenda by name, or if you've maybe seen them here, they've been at HCC for a while. This might be your first time ever getting to meet them, and so I'm really glad for that. And you guys, we're going to dive in to your story, but maybe what we could do before we go backwards, kind of give us present day. Tell us a little bit about how long you've been married, kids, grandkids, stuff like that.
So Brenda and I have been married for 31 years. We've been together for 32 years. Thank you. We have 8 grandchildren, ages 1 through 15.
And by the way, just same as last time, Robbie. Robbie, who cares about the kids? We've got grandkids. I mean, it just goes right to the jugular. I just love it.
That's what it's about, the grandkids.
Yeah, we're going to talk about who we love most. Go ahead.
Exactly. All right, we have 5 kids together. They're aged from 21 to 32.
All right, good. So a little snapshot of where you guys are at family-wise today. Well, let's see this. One of the things as we talk today that will become very evident, and one thing, if you have done much reflection in your own life, you'll note that though you might not be determined by the home you grew up in, I believe strongly that's not the case, I believe it is the case that we're not determined by how we grew up, but we're influenced very deeply. It's our world that we know and very formative time in our lives. So Robbie and Brenda, as you guys share, before we even go to when you guys met, your relationship, back us up a little bit related to the homes you grew up in and just kind of the issues that kind of came from that time.
Sure. Okay, I was the youngest of 6 children, and we all shared the same parents. I was born in Phoenix, Arizona, and we remained there until I was about 8 years old, and that's when we moved. I had three siblings that struggled with pretty significant drug and alcohol addiction, and I had one sister she's passed away now, but we know now that she struggled with a sexual addiction. Looking back at my parents, they married young, 16 and 23 years old, and they remained married until my father passed away in 1999. Looking back at their life, my mom was raised by a single mom of 11 children. She was the youngest of 11. And my father was raised by divorced parents, but mostly by his father. And he was pretty abused physically and mentally. And knowing my dad's characteristic and just the person that he was, we could pretty much sum it up that he was probably sexually molested too, because later we found out that my grandfather actually molested many of his grandchildren. We left Arizona when I was 8 years old after my dad became disabled. My uncle had brutally attacked my father and left him disabled, unable to work like how he used to. So he moved to California for various reasons. I grew up in a pretty broken and dysfunctional family. There was a lot of fighting, a lot of yelling. Holidays always had screaming and yelling. My mom was a gambler, a daily gambler. She was an enabler. She was codependent. And I fit that description perfectly too, other than the gambling, but it would be the reason why I would find somebody like Rob, because he fit that need that I had to fill my cup. Growing up, we attended Catholic church. I was raised to believe in God, but it was a very scary thing for me because I was raised to be really afraid of God. So I would say I was spiritually abused in that department. In our family, the rules were no rules. There was just a lot of chaos. We could do what we want. There was no structure. There was no healthy family dynamics. There was no ownership. If somebody did something wrong, it was always somebody else's fault. My upbringing, like I said, we lived poorly, but we probably shouldn't have had addictions not got in the way. My father, he was an alcoholic. I think I forgot to mention that. My father was an alcoholic. And so I never remember really any physical attention from my parents, any loving physical attention. Once in a while, a hug here and there from my mom, and they would say they loved me. But with my father's situation, I think he was just so afraid of any kind of touch that I never received a hug from my father, not one time growing up, that I can remember. So I still struggle with that today, because I still long for that healthy physical touch from a father. And hopefully, he's died now, but hopefully in heaven I'll be able to get that from him. As I got older, into my teen years, I got a little bit more angry at my father. I was the one that was the most angry out of all my siblings. My dad got a little bit more drunk, a little bit more angry, never physical, but just more loud, more sloppy drunk, stuff like that. And so I remember growing up and being really angry at him, and I vowed that I was never, ever going to marry an addict. But, little did I know that problematic sexual behavior, it hijacks the mind, and it destroys the brain. It's a drug that's built inside of your brain, so it's readily available. But that kind of addiction worked for me because I longed to be loved, and they longed for that attention to medicate their pain. So it was an addiction that worked for me.
I was born in Suriname. It's a country in South America, and we migrated to the United States when I was about 10 years old. I have a full sister and 2 half-siblings. They were both the result of an affair that my dad had with 2 different women. My brother was the same age as me. He recently passed away due to chronic alcoholism. My grandfather on my dad's side, when my dad was an infant, my grandfather was about 21 years old, and he was stabbed to death in a bar fight while he was flirting with another woman. My dad was raised by a stepdad that was very abusive to him. My mom's father died while she was young due to a surgery on his back. And she was also raised by a stepdad that was very abusive. While our family didn't really have many rules, there was one rule that we did have, and that was you don't talk about what happens within this family. And I learned that at an early age when my parents were still in another one of their fights or arguments about his affairs. I left and went to play with a friend of mine. And as I got there, I was still upset. And my friend's dad saw that I was upset and asked what was wrong. And when I told him, he called my parents, and I was the one that got in trouble for sharing about what was happening within the family. While my mom didn't really like my dad's behavior, I know now that she was an enabler because she allowed porn in the house, and she also allowed him to go and accompany him to strip clubs.
So then what we hear with Robbie and Brenda, these are the home lives that you guys were raised in, the challenges that you had through childhood, and then you meet. Tell us a little bit about the circumstances for when you guys met each other.
When I was about 17 years old, I was in my angry years, and I got a taste of going out and partying with friends. I would hang out with older people. I was faking my age, and I just kind of was living that rebel life. I longed for that true love that I thought would look what love looked like to me, and I was longing to find that perfect relationship. But every time I would find that person that I thought was my true love, reality would hit, and really I was just being used for one thing. I'd be used and then left. So each time that would happen, it would drive my brokenness a little bit deeper. And then at the age of 19, my actions ultimately left me pregnant with my daughter. So after that, I was pretty sad. I was lost. The man who got me pregnant, he left, so he didn't even know that he has a child. To this day, he doesn't know because he was never to be found. So after that, I was pretty lost. I was sad. I vowed that I was never gonna marry a man. I was just angry, and I vowed it would be just me and my daughter. So I had no intentions of developing any kind of relationship at that point. I was 7 months pregnant, and then my friend invited me over to her house with her. She had her boyfriend there, and he had his friend, Robbie. And she invited me over, and my intention was just to go and visit, not to have any kind of relationship. Like I said, I vowed I'm not doing this. I had bigger problems on my plate that I had to worry about. I was still living with my dysfunctional family and so forth. Robbie was pursuing me, but I paid no mind to it until a second time I went over to her house, and he was still pursuing me. But in my mind, because I longed to be loved, I was hungry for that attention and for that love. Rob kept pursuing me, and I was like, what kind of crazy man would want to be with somebody that's 7 months pregnant? He's got to want me, right? He's got to want to be with me. And so he continued to pursue me, and I was thinking, well, he's not leaving. He's actually moving toward me. So maybe this is the guy. And so that's when we started our relationship.
As Brenda mentioned, I met her at a friend's house. I was in the military, and I'd just been stationed at Fort Irwin. And when I met Brenda, I had a girlfriend that was also pregnant. I asked her to move out here to California so we could start a family, but she refused. She didn't want to leave New Jersey. So I look back now, as I look back at it, I felt rejected. I felt alone. I missed that family. Even though my family was dysfunctional, it was still part of me. It was still part of having a family. So within Brenda, I found somebody I could talk to, someone I can spend time with, but also someone I can rescue. So unfortunately, my problematic sexual behavior started at an early age, and so that behavior didn't really stop even though I met Brenda. And I continue to have conversations with my ex, and I end up manipulating both Brenda and my ex.
So you guys begin a relationship, met each other, you're kind of now becoming a couple. And as you're processing that and thinking, like what most couples do, we're finding connections, there's a love there. Jesus isn't anywhere in the picture at this stage in your guys' lives. And then you consider the idea, maybe this is where we're headed towards marriage. And in that process, like many of us in this room have come to know, thinking that marriage is going to make something better, and whatever problems we bring are somehow just gonna vaporize now that we put rings on each other's fingers, is not the case. And you guys found that out to be true as well. Tell us a little bit about that.
So when I was pregnant with my daughter, we were about 1 year into our relationship. Like Todd said, we didn't have Christ in our life. We're living in sin. We had an opportunity to visit Robbie's parents in Delaware, and I was able to go. And it would also be the first time that Robbie would be able to meet his daughter of 5 months old. So we went to Delaware, and we were really excited. But he met his daughter. We were actually both able to meet his daughter for the first time. We took her out and enjoyed our time with her. And then when he dropped her off after the meet, we were told that, or I was told that, all other visits that he had during that time had to be at the ex's house, and I wasn't allowed to go to that visit. So that was the rule. I was a girlfriend, so I wasn't going to, argue that. Nor did I want to. I was too afraid of losing Robbie. So we fast forward to the next visit with Robbie's child. Robbie would take me and my daughter of 9 months old, and he dropped us off at a mall parking lot where we would wait for 3 hours to wait while he had his visit. And in my mind, I knew what was going on. I knew in my mind exactly what was happening. I was sad. I was scared. I was 2,000 miles away from home. I didn't know my surroundings. I was humiliated. I felt completely unchosen. But in my heart, like I said, I knew. Rob would pick us up about 3 hours later from the parking lot with no expression on his face whatsoever as we got in the car. I was irate, I was crying, I was obviously, hurt, abandoned. I felt all those emotions. I was just completely heartbroken. My pain was so intense that I remember we had, came on vacation and I had fresh new acrylic professional nails on, and I was able to rip every single one of those nails off my finger feeling no pain because my pain in my body was just so deep from the heartbreak. Robbie had no emotion when I got in the car. He didn't have any expression. He was quiet, but he didn't have any expression. And now I know it's because he didn't have empathy. He didn't know how to have empathy at the time. Empathy wasn't something that he learned. It's a learned emotion. It should be mirrored from his family or, from his upbringing. He just didn't have that. So he didn't know even how to show emotion, empathy. Obviously, I was sad, but I was so fearful that Robbie would leave me if I said anything, so I quickly learned how to just shove that stuff under the rug and just leave it there. It was easier for me to not talk about it and keep him than talk about it and lose him. In my mind, that's what I thought. Robbie, like I said, didn't talk about it, because if he talked about it, he had to admit it. If he had to admit it, that means he did something wrong, and if he did something wrong, that means something's wrong with him. So that never happened. He was good at doing things, though, like doing or suggesting things like flowers and whatnot. So when that happened on that day, Robbie suggests that when we fly home from Delaware to Vegas that we get married, and that would be on January 4th. But backing up to January 3rd, Rob and his buddies decided they were going to go out to have a little bachelor party. And so he would arrive back at his parents' house about 1 a.m. And I can just feel my intuition, my gut instinct was there. And for all the ladies, I just want to tell you that we do have a gut instinct, but and you know it. And when you know it, if you pull that out, God can use that for your glory and start your healing. I mentioned my intuition to Rob, and I was shot down. It was pretty much, he told me I didn't know what I was talking about. What I knew wasn't true. What I saw, what I knew, I was just convinced it wasn't real. And then as I laid there and I watched him sleeping, there were physical signs on Robbie that I noticed, and it matched up directly with my gut thinking. But still, my mind went there to where I just made myself believe that what I knew, what I knew wasn't real. And it's kind of like that narrative that would always fit in my head. It's just that dysfunctional thinking that I'm just not good enough to be loved. After we were married, I truly believed that all of our problems would go away. Rob chose me, he wanted me. I was the one that won this battle. But reality is we weren't really doing anything differently to stop this crazy cycle of insanity. Robbie would fall deeper and deeper into his addiction. Deceit continued, not only on his body, but my body. Viewing porn continued, and no matter how many times he would do it, I would find a way to fix the problem and just shove it under the rug and act like it wasn't there, because it was easier for me to do that. If I did finally express my emotions, the fear of him leaving me would consume me, and so I would just do whatever I could do to fix it. I was the one that would try to fix it. My idol was my husband, and I was on a destructive cycle of codependency and enabling that would lead him back to the very thing that I despised. So he was wrapped up in this addiction, but I was actually addicted to my husband. So
I thought if we got married, things would change. I would change, behaviors would change. And after getting married, my behavior what did change for a little bit, but as the weight of being married, the weight of having children, the weight of life took over, so did my problematic sexual behavior, the porn, and that eventually led to affairs. I realize now that it wasn't about the sex. It was about what's called the thrill of the chase. It's the chemical release in our brain of endorphins, adrenaline, looking for that next high as you surf the internet. Unfortunately, what you're looking at today doesn't stay the same. It continues to grow, and you need something else, just like any other drug. Eventually, it will lead to you in a dark place to where you would never be vowed you would never go, or it would lead to eventually to having affairs, which I ended up doing again.
So here we are, you guys are married, you have littles, you're raising them, the challenges of all those dynamics, but then add to it. And I appreciate how you said it, Brenda, not only did Robbie have addictions that had become that little g God in his life, but you did, and it was Robbie. It was, I can't lose him, so whatever I need to do to maintain that. And we see that brokenness in our lives, right? It just leaks into other things, other relationships, and even takes us to places that we'd never really thought we'd go. And in your guys' marriage, that thing that was so frustrating to you and hurtful that Robbie was doing with problematic sexual behaviors even began to be something that you became a part of. Right. Tell us a little bit about that.
So when you grow up and you live a life of brokenness and dysfunction, you just don't realize how much a pull it could have on you. You take some of that into your marriage, even when you don't think you are, but you bring those problems with you. I don't blame my parents for how I was raised. I know they did the best they can, and I know that they probably did better than their parents, because that's always the vow, right? And still I vowed to do things different with my husband and my children. The generational curses were becoming stronger in our marriage. My desire to be chosen and loved was even stronger. It got to a point where I would do anything I could to save my marriage and show Rob that I loved him and receive that love from him back. I was willing to go to the place of dysfunction, a place that I despised, a place that I knew that would cripple us as a married couple. And at the time I didn't understand the cost of what I was doing, but I was willing to go there. But now, as we moved on into our relationship, I decided that I was going to be a partner in helping to drive that behavior, and I started watching porn with Rob. This was an enabling act, and I was directing him to the very thing that I despised and the very thing that was killing me. This was a time where I was willing to just sacrifice everything because I was so afraid that he was going to leave me. I fell into a deep depression at that time. This is when we accepted Christ, so sin was a little bit stronger and it was a little bit more powerful on me. I was sinning not only against my body, but I was sinning against God. And I went to a place where I thought, I can't do this anymore. If I just left, then Robbie would be a happier person. He can get what he wants and he can live his life. And if I just left, then I could, my kids would be happier. And it was on that day on that time of our life that I decided that I would attempt to commit suicide.
I tried to introduce pornography into our relationship thinking that would make things better. But Brenda wasn't very comfortable with it. And then eventually, as she mentioned, she tried to end her life. That was a wake-up call for us, or for me, and so we knew we needed something. So we started some counseling, and then we started attending a church, different church than High Desert Church. And as we attended church, our kids were involved in Bible ministry, and we would go all over the Southern California. They would compete in Bible verses. And Brenda and I accepted Christ in our living room. I knew about Christ. I was introduced to him by some missionaries in Suriname when I was young. My father, who at that time did not believe in God or Christ, they allowed me to go. My mom was Muslim and it still is to today. I think they just wanted to get rid of me for a few hours on Sunday. So I would go there. So I knew about him. But as I accepted Christ and surrendered to him, I never fully trusted him. And I realized it wasn't that I didn't just trust God, I didn't trust anybody. That was one of my wounds that I needed to work through in my healing journey. But as we were going to church, things seemed to be a little bit better. But then as life happened, we stopped going. We stopped including God into our life. And slowly, as the weight of the world started to creep back in, so did the pornography. And so it did eventually lead to having another affair.
So for you, Brenda, you're going through this. It's so damaging. You're even considering, I don't even want to be here anymore. There's a point, though, that things kind of went to a head that you just said, I'm not going to do that. Tell us about the things that led up to that.
Sure. So as we got deeper into our marriage, more affairs happened, more deception happened with a long-term affair. He had a long-term affair with a stripper. And I would find out about this later, but it was during that time. So I could see there was, something happening in him. And during that time, ownership didn't happen with Robbie. Anytime something happened, he could go as far as even blaming one of his children for, if we found porn on the computer and whatnot, it was somebody else's fault. So ground zero happened when I finally witnessed with my own eyes that Robbie was continuing a physical sexual activity with another female. And it was about that time when I said, enough is enough. I cannot do this anymore. So I told him he had to go. I didn't tell him how to fix it. I didn't try to fix it. I just said, you got to go. I can't live like this anymore. Enough is enough, and I'm worth more. My children are worth more, and I'm enough. And it's crazy to believe that sometimes until you get that smack in the face of reality and it's right in your eyes in front of you, that you're willing to do so much to just hide it and tuck it away. But reality is, if you face it and you pull it out and you just call it for what it is and face it, God will use that for his glory. He saw my pain. God saw my cries for truth. I was praying a lot during that time. He allowed the moment to be presented right at that exact time where I wasn't second guessing myself anymore. There was no way I could, because it was right in front of my eyes. And when a wife or a husband discovers this kind of reality where they've been betrayed sexually, everything that you know as truth is just distorted now. But God gave me that truth, and he told me I'm enough, and he's gonna take care of me. I couldn't do this unhealthy dance anymore. My kids played a huge role in this. I didn't want my son to think that this was a trait that he was going to inherit and that was a good trait. And I didn't want my daughters thinking that this was acceptable behavior to be treated that way. It was up to me to begin that generational curse. And even though Rob's choices are his, what he did, it wasn't my fault. But I was definitely a partner in enabling him and leading him to the way. So I finally had to stand up and take a stand to break this generational curse. It was probably the scariest thing I've ever done in my entire life. I didn't know how I would survive. I didn't know where I would live. I didn't know about income. All those things played a role, but I knew that I had to get help. I remember that I cried out to God, and I just remember saying, God, I can't do this anymore. I can't fix him. There's nothing else I can do to try to fix him. And so I'm giving him to you, and I'm putting him at your feet. I can't do it. But the funny thing is God was trying to say, he's been waiting for me to get out of the way so he can fix my husband. And that was the problem. I was saying I can't fix him, but God can do miraculous things. So when I left him in his hands, God started to work in our marriage, and he took our ashes and created beauty out of them. We weren't too broken for God. My husband wasn't too dysfunctional for God. I wasn't too dysfunctional for God. And, we're his children, so he took care of us.
March 9th, 2009, Brenda kicked me out of the house. It was around 1:30 in the morning. I grabbed a change of clothes for work, my toiletries, and my life insurance policy, because I wanted to make sure it covered suicide. I drove out in the middle of the desert and just sat there and read the policy. And as I read it, it covered suicide. And as I sat there thinking about the easiest and quickest way of doing it, the least painful way, because I am a coward, I heard this distinct voice that said, hold on. And when I heard that voice, it was as if a weight was lifted off my shoulders. What I didn't know then, what I found out years later, was that Brenda was praying for me in that moment. In that moment, she was praying for God to take care of me. And as he did, as I sat there and waited for the sun to come up, not knowing what was next, but just knowing to hold on, I rededicated my life to him. And this time, not only did I surrender my life to him, but I trusted him with whatever outcome was going to be. I trusted him with my wife. I trusted him with my life. I trusted him with my marriage. If it meant that our marriage was to be dissolved, then so be it. I was okay with it. I was comfortable with his decision. I'd gotten in the way so many times, and I just needed him to take over.
Amen. So you guys get to this point, and it's fascinating in your story how you both kind of come to this powerful realization within literally hours of each other of what God's doing and what he wants to do. So you had already put your lives in Christ, and his Spirit's indwelling you. You have this powerful moment where you realize there's hope and we need to change, but you had some great help along the way. So kind of tell us about the people God placed along the way in your life.
Sure. First, this journey is long. It's not a microwave fix, and it's going to take a lot of work for anyone that is struggling. We never would have made it without the sweet, unconditional love of God. He took a very broken couple, and he made a powerhouse out of us, and I truly believe that. After Rob left home, he started therapy, and then he started the Men's Pure Life group. And then after he was going for a while, he asked me to join the spouses support group. When he suggested that, I was pretty mad. I was like, why am I going to this group so you can, get your way? I'm not the one that has the problem. You're the one that needs to fix you. And now you want me to go to this group? It made no sense to me. And I went, though, but I went mad, kicking, screaming, all that stuff. That thought, why should I go? This isn't my problem, it's yours, was there. But I started going to group at a lovely lady's house in 2009, where women like me were there, and they were just dealing with the same exact stuff as me. My leader, she knew exactly my pain. She knew exactly my anger. She knew how to meet me where I was. There was a sense of sisterhood there that wouldn't judge me or try to fix me. They didn't advise me on what to do, but they listened to me. And instead of telling me how to live my life, they just prayed with me and prayed over me. I didn't have to shove my feelings away anymore. That was a behavior that I would often do in fear. And so I was allowed to really feel. We worked through a study, and I learned about the different stages of grief, how to get through them. We learned that it's okay to have boundaries, healthy boundaries, and boundaries with grace, and how to apply them. And I didn't know as much about the sweet love of Jesus as I did when I started going to those groups. I also learned that Jesus has boundaries, and that's kind of cool to know. I learned that my distorted thoughts of myself aren't the thoughts that God thinks of me. And I learned that he can really create a masterpiece out of our broken pieces if we allow him to. I just learned that I have a gentle love of a father. God, and they love me unconditionally, or he loves me unconditionally. And I just, I don't know, we're just not less important to God just because we're broken. He actually wants to use our troubles and our brokenness for good.
So I knew I needed help after that morning, so I started counseling. And where I was counseling, there was this group from High Desert Church that would meet there called the Pure Life for Men's group. So I started the group, and within that group, I found a bunch of men that were going through the same struggles I was, that were dealing with the same things I was, and I didn't feel alone anymore. I also knew I wasn't being judged. But there was also another group of men there that had walked this journey, had come out the other side with Christ by their side, as Christ as the head of their household. As I dug into the group and into my counseling, and also into what I could learn on my own about how the brain works, how addictions happen, I also dug into the Bible. And as I started reading my Bible and actually wanted to see what God's vision for my life was, I knew I had a vision, but mine was very distorted. God's vision for my life, I realized that when God told me to hold on, it wasn't for me to hold on by myself to just the steering wheel. It was for me to hold on to him. That was a prophetic promise he gave me. We started attending High Desert Church, and we continued to attend High Desert Church. Within 6 months of being a part of the Men's Pure Life group, I became part of the leadership, and I am still today.
So that's 14 years ago that you guys have been in this process of seeing what God is redeeming and healing and mending in powerful ways. What would you say, and you guys, we'll talk more before we're done about just your ongoing ministry with people, with couples that are struggling, and you've really turned your story into being a place where others can find hope and healing as well. What would you say to those, maybe someone who's here today, any of our campuses online, who's saying, I have some relatable parts of my story, I don't know what to do next? What kind of encouragement would you give them?
Sure. Well, I would say to the couples that are facing this right now, first of all, there's so many couples facing it right now, and it's got to stop being the elephant in the room. They're afraid to stand up and say that we need help. I believe mostly because there is a fear of shame. There's a fear of them being judged or exposed. Nobody wants to admit this is a struggle. I think there's a big thought from the spouses that, what will they think of me or my husband? Because many of the spouses that deal with this are protectors. codependent. I've said for years, though, now that we're as sick as our secrets, and I refuse to stuff my stuff away anymore. God will use our struggles for good if you let him in. I hid my husband's stuff for so long, and we fell sick to it. But the surface problem is just the sexual sin. There's a deeper problem, and that deeper problem is wounds that we have to get through. The sexual sin is just something that you medicate with. There is help. There's a group of ladies for the spouses that are, their husbands are struggling. And there's a group of ladies, and we're not there to judge you. We let you make your own decisions. We help you walk through this time of your life, and we often, we get that outside advice that so many people in our lives want to tell us, their way to do it. A lot of people in your life, family of origin or whatnot, they just love you so much they think you should do it their way, and sometimes that could be probably the worst advice because you need to be able to make decisions on your own. We're a place where you can go, where you can learn about you, why you do what you do, how you got to this place in the first place. You learn about your family origin rules and roles, whether they were good or bad. You learn about traumas that you take into your marriage with you. In our group, we learn about how to create boundaries that are loving boundaries, and those boundaries are to protect yourself, not to be, a cop for your spouse. We learn how to forgive when you're ready, and how to let God lead your marriage and not so much you trying to control your marriage. There are many ladies struggling with this, and they don't realize that there's hope for them. They think there's zero help. We've been through it, so we feel the pain. We know your cries. We know how hard this is. And we're just a place where you can come and we can share that grief with you, because so often we think, we have nobody, so.
Sexual sin separates you from others. It separates you from God. It doesn't matter if you're single or if you're married. The world wants us to think that porn is okay, that having affairs, sleeping around, premarital sex, it's all okay. But it affects our brain. It affects our bodies. There's not a mess that we can get ourselves in that God can't fix. For those of you that are married, or those of you that have kids, just realize if they have access to the internet, by the time they're 18, they will be 100% exposed to pornography. And as parents and as grandparents, we need to have healthy conversations with our children about what healthy sexuality looks like. I used to ask all the men that came to the group, how many of you, your dads, had a conversation with you about sex? And out of the hundreds of men, I can count on one hand how many did. And unfortunately, it was usually a quick one time or watch this movie. Realize that sexual addiction is the same thing to our brain as crack cocaine. When the brain scans are done, it's the same parts of our brain that are lacking blood flow. We would never tell anyone it's okay to use a little bit of crack cocaine. Never tell anyone it's okay, he's just watching some porn or whatever it may be, because it's destructive. You do not want that stuff in your home. Within our group, we help and walk men through the struggles they've had. Give them some tools, give them some understanding. And the goal, I always get asked, why do I continue to do this after 14 years, being a part of this? Because usually within a ministry like this, guys burn out after about 5 years of leading it. And my joy is seeing couples, seeing men restored, whether they're single or married. Seeing them restored. I see them at church. I see them out in the stores, and just seeing them walk in joy and not having that shame, not having that weight, because I know what that was like. It led me to almost end my life.
You guys, I'm so grateful for your vulnerability, grateful for your honesty, grateful for the hope that is so rich in your stories. I'm just so grateful for you. Can you guys thank Robbie and Brenda? Before we go, I want to share with you just what you have in your hands, your notes today. They're different, like last week was different as well. I just want you to explain real quickly what you have. On the front page and on the inside page are verses that I asked Robbie and Brenda, what were passages in scripture that were especially helpful, especially grounding for you in such difficult seasons? And these are the ones that they gave me, and I thought they were so good. And as you read those over, you'll know they're very particular and specific to their story. If you look at the third page on the inside, you'll note the different QR codes. Those correspond to 4 different websites that are just such great resources, stories, tools, just the abilities to be able to get some help and understanding in the right direction. And so we would put those out in front of you as a great set of resources. And like we've said all throughout the series, you can get our resource list just by texting the word laundry to 64567. That'll come to your phone, and this and others will be there. On the back page are 3 different books that we just have said. These are really helpful in trying to process. And then lastly are the ministries that Robbie and Brenda aren't just supportive of or think are good, they lead and have really continued to devote their lives to helping people, helping individuals and couples really find healing and hope where they have found that as well. And I just love that about them. So you'll see Pure Life and the contact information there, how to get in touch and begin attending. And then also Brenda's group dealing with sexual betrayal, and there's contact information there as well. So our goal in this weekend has simply been to give you resources, to give you a bridge into a place where we can actually take a step. I can actually take a step towards what God really wants for my life. And it really is something that's worthwhile and something worth going towards, though it's gonna take work. And Robbie and Brenda would attest to that. Let me pray and thank God for you guys and just pray for our church. Father, we want to say thank you so much for today. Thank you for Robbie and Brenda that have been willing, God, to share a story that is not only of damage and difficulty, but God, filled with your amazing mercy and grace, filled with your healing, filled with your hope. And I'm so grateful, God, for all of what they've been through because of what you've turned it into. As Brenda said, beauty for ashes. Thank you especially for these last 14 years that have been just so meaningful and grounding and demonstrated not only the way you can indeed redeem, but God, they've gotten to experience the fruit of that. And I'm so grateful for them. But I'm thinking of our church today as well. And God, where there are places of hurt and damage and devastation, would you help us to realize today that no one is too far gone and that no situation is so far gone that it cannot be redeemed. And so I just pray that there would be next steps that are taken today that begin down that road. And you may be here today and you would say, Todd, my biggest problem is really not even that of what's going on with problematic sexual behavior. It's the reality of just how I'm not right with God. I've never taken this step that Robbie and Brenda talked about where they place their faith in you. And I know I need to do that. And you can do that today by beginning by just admitting that you're a sinner who needs a savior. You already knew that when you walked in the door, but there's that sense of being able to agree with God. I'm the one who has walked away from you. Would you believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through him. Believe that Jesus' atoning work on the cross and his supernatural resurrection from the dead was all for you and can make you right with God. So would you choose, would you put your faith, your confidence, as Robbie talked about, the difficulty of putting your trust in what Jesus has accomplished for you, and would you begin following his example for your life? You can do that today by responding in that kind of prayer of these ABCs, and I just pray you wouldn't let another day go by until you do. Father, thank you for your amazing grace over our lives. Thank you for what you heal and the hope that you give. We love you and we pray in Jesus' great name, amen. Hey, one more time, would you thank Robbie and Brenda today?